Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Come Together, another solo episode. It's been a good week, good productive week since our last solo episode, and a lot happening, a lot going on, and a lot going on personally, a lot going on in the world, a lot going on that I've been reading about, learning, experiencing, and a lot of really good, awesome, fun things. Um, I guess oh man, so many places to start. First of all, I'm saying this out loud for the record because I think I'm pretty much, I know I say this all the time, but um, I've been more and more serious about it and have been acting on it. Is my body just does not agree with hard alcohol anymore. And so um, I am going to, I think, just start sticking with lighter beverages at smaller portions and just call it that, I think, for my life. Because yesterday, things that, I took, I don't know, maybe five, six, seven different, shots or shots worth of alcohol and spent the whole night sick. And I can't do that anymore. And I keep on thinking, and it comes from a misplaced trust in my body and what I'm capable of, and I keep on showing myself that it's not actually what I should be doing at almost 30, and that this isn't the lifestyle that I'm living, and I can't. The lifestyle I'm living doesn't support really any kind of abuse to my body like that anymore. It just, when you're healthy, and I lost a bunch of weight, so the alcohol is processed differently, and then I'm drinking much less frequently, especially hard alcohol. So when I am drinking, my body, I guess, has a harder time processing and breaking it down, and I'm just done with it. I keep on saying that, but took that first month off of drinking, and I'm not drinking a lot of high gravity, which are high ABV or high sugar beers for the most part, and I generally don't make cocktails anyway. So, but if I will, then I think that's what it's just going to be light casual, and just the notion of it just seems is just always exhausting to me, and it's never worth it. And I guess this is how it's the circle of life. This is what happens when you feel, when you were once young and felt like you were, when I was young and I felt like I was, instead of flipping this on you, when I was young and I felt undefeatable, and like it was also some kind of social value currency, a good escape, a good social lubricant, a good way to give me stupid confidence that was not authentic and not real. And yeah, no more of that. So for the record, um, that's where we're working towards, and then slowly cut out other other forms of poison for me, because I've cut out most of it. So yeah, that was it was so miserable. It was just my whole Saturday night was ruined. I pushed myself to go for a jog, and I literally was passed out by 9:45. I couldn't watch TV. I couldn't listen to a podcast. I couldn't listen to music. I was just so miserable and so not happy that but I got to sleep. I probably slept the best. I got more rest than I think I had in a long time. It's something I really needed to continue, because, as I've mentioned many times, I push myself close to the point of burning out so frequently that breaks like this and times like this where my body just tells me, "Yo, listen up, time to time to stop, time to take a break, time to you can't do this anymore," and it's time to finally listen and keep an open mind and understand this is where I am with my life. Um, so a lot going on. I don't really know quite where to begin. I guess I'll start with the book that's right in front of me, which was written by Jennifer Burns, who uh, was just on the Lex Friedman podcast this past week or two. That's recently how I've been discovering a lot of great books and content, because there's so many books out there, and there's so many topics, and there's so many cross topics, and there's so many people that just publish so much information, so much content. It's so hard, at least for me, to really know what to buy, who to read, who to listen to, who knows what they're talking about, who doesn't. I mean, I don't always get it right, of course, but I try to go for, generally speaking, open-minded and non-politicized information, unless it's obviously about a particular political topic, and then it's more about trying to get different perspectives from it. But one of the ways that in the last couple of months that I've found was a really great way to discover new books and authors and some more content is by listening to guests that are on podcasts. And anyone that's listened to this before knows who my typical lineups are. Obviously, Lex, Friedman, Rogan, Huberman, Glenn Greenwald, I listen to at least once or twice a week. Um, I listen to Diary of a CEO. I listen to Modern Wisdom every now and then. I like the long form content that gets industry leaders or industry experts, and more often than not, these people will have published books. And if I'm impressed with if and I, you know what, and I have to agree with the conversation about with the point that's made over and over again in the podcast sphere about the value of podcasts, which is that if you have a podcast to someone for 45 minutes or an hour, they can kind of BS and pretend to be a certain way. However, if you once you're talking for a certain period of time, and once you're really getting into different topics and the conversation's really in free flow and you don't really know where it's going to go, then the real colors of who the author is and and the level of their knowledge and the extent of their wisdom really tends to come out. And you could see how the conversation, which is typically like a dance or even a sport, just like the back and forth and the different ways of analyzing statements and understanding the context in which the statements are being made. And then, let's say, for example, if I'm talking to someone, I make a statement and they look confused, I feel pressed to clarify myself and to provide background so that I can help put that person that I'm talking to into my shoes so they can understand the background in which the background to the point that I'm making. And then hopefully, if they're a good conversationalist, they will either understand and adjust, or explain themselves and then have me adjust, because I think that's actually one of the things that I love most when I have conversations with people is when I think something a certain way and I explain why I think what I think, and then they say, I understand why you think what you think. Here is how I'm going to respond to that, or here is additional context that you may not have you may not have considered. And so and it happens to be that these podcasters these podcasts that I listen to, and this information that I consume, I try to find as much of that type of conversation as possible. I try to find as much of two different people with a lot of information, a lot of knowledge, and might even be looking at life from one lens, sharing a stage or sharing a room or sharing a podcast with someone else that comes from another background with another lens, looking through another lens, and kind of seeing what emerges from that, and provide with a new kind of squished and unified or newfound understanding, maybe some kind of like mutant understanding, I guess, because it's the combination of these two. And then the more that we do that, the more we can get to some kind of collective understanding or collective truth. And you can understand when points are being made or when someone's saying what they're saying, where they're coming from, and learn the appropriate way to really deal with people. And I think that's the fun part about conversations. The fun part about conversations is that there's no such thing as a formula. I mean, you could have general basic rules if you want, general structures if you want, but there's no such thing as a formula, because your formula is not going to work for everyone. People are just too independent and too individual and too different. We grow up in different worlds with different backgrounds, with different religious, with different educational experiences, with different values. When we're trying to solve different, we're trying to satisfy different goals that that we might be consciously or unconsciously searching for. And and the more that people talk and the more that we communicate as humans, that as opposed to like bullies or like animals, and not to say like an animal in the most derogatory sense, but in the sense of just like in just responding instinctively or vehemently or without putting a lot of intention or consciousness to our back and forths. That's really more what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about or like hitting someone or attacking someone, which is also like animalistic behavior. I mean, it's preposterous that we live in today's world with today's technology and today's level of education and knowledge and how advanced we are, and we still resort to like hitting and mugging and I don't know. I mean, it feels crazy to me. I don't really know what the answer is. Um, so I got this book. So Lex had this brilliant lady, Jennifer Burns, on, who let me see if there's anything even about her. Is assistant history professor, University of Virginia, and lives in Charlottesville, Virginia. Good for her. She's great. And when I heard her speak, I was really impressed because Lex started the conversation saying how technical it was going to be, and you and I had the feeling that the podcast was technical. The level of depth when it came to the conversation and it came to the people they were discussing, which was primarily Ayn Rand and Milton Friedman, I believe. And she wrote biographies on both of them. And she considers herself super fascinating historian of ideas, not people. As in, she studies philosophies and ideas that kind of bubble up in culture or society or in the world, and she'll study the influence and the impact that idea has. Obviously, it manifests through individuals who spread those ideas or societies that embody them. But she doesn't stick to just a person; she sticks to ideas, which is really cool. And and maybe that's why she was so interested in Ayn Rand, because Ayn Rand is so and it's so controversial. I don't even know why she's so controversial. I just and you know I don't know all of her perspective, and I didn't read all her books. It happens to be that out of her books, I read The Fountainhead, and to me, it was one of the most life changing books I've ever read. And it wasn't life changing because I 1,000% agreed with everything that she said to the extent that she took her philosophy and her characters. So for some clarification, The Fountainhead is a book that was written by Ayn Rand, I believe in the 50s or the 60s, but she worked on it for a very long time, and it's like an 800-page book, 900-page book, and it's really the collection of four stories from four different perspectives of four different prototypes of people. And even just that concept in and of itself, that people represent prototypes in society, is literally in terms of just from a creator's point of view and from a writer's point of view and from a philosophical perspective, it's so brilliant to take an individual and have them embody an entire perspective and philosophy. And part of what happens with that is that the person becomes relatively one dimensional because the only reason why they exist is to understand what this philosophy is, to explain to the reader, to the audience, how the philosophy would manifest in a perfect way in the perfect world in their lives. And obviously, we don't live in a perfect world, and obviously, we're not perfect people. So the stories don't come across as very real or very achievable, and that's okay. It's interesting because philosophically, even and again, as an Orthodox Jew, that's someone that reads and learns Torah every day or the Old Testament and all the works connected to it and associated with it, that that we think that about the characters in the Torah too, in the Old Testament too. We consider characters like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, to be manifestations of different nuanced personality traits that are supposed to be embodied or represented by the I guess the Jewish world, the Jewish perspective. And so Abraham is kindness and lovingness, and Isaac or Yitzchak is din, is the opposite, I wouldn't necessarily call it opposite, but a little bit more of the stricter sense of law. Din means law in Hebrew, and judgment. And so judgment is not necessarily good or bad, but it helps identify and sort good or bad, right? So you can have lovingness and you can have kindness, but that gone without any kind of sense of what you're going to do with that kindness and what are you trying to achieve and what kind of tangible goals are you going for, it kind of becomes a little bit pie in the sky. And so we need that. And then Yaakov or Jacob is the person that actually finds a way to blend the two of them, and he's a combination of kindness and um, judgment. And that's actually, he finds that real sweet spot that we should all kind of try to live by. And that's why he's the one that's deserving of the name and the title of Israel. And that's kind of what we hope for. That's what we aspire for. And so, so not only are these characters, these characters are prototypes in the same way that Ayn Rand would have her, and we say, Judaism lahavdil, because you're not comparing the Testament to Ayn Rand, but we're saying that, she has four main characters: Howard Rourke and Ellsworth Toohey and Peter Keating, and I forgot the last guy's name. But he was a really interesting character too. And each one of them represent a philosophy that exists in the world, and then the whole book is about their relationship with one another and how these philosophies and perspectives collide and interact with one another. And so just that in and of itself, taking different philosophies, putting them into individual characters, and then having them interact with one another is a monumental and incredible feat. I mean, and maybe it's more impressive to me because I have a very difficult time coming up, coming up with long and complicated stories, keeping track of a lot of different narratives and a lot of different, keeping track of a whole vision in my head, and then creating the individual components that will make that picture. I guess that's why I'm not really great at art either, because an artist will kind of take a canvas, or a sculptor will have a vision in mind and then slowly add details and details and details until but while keeping that big image in their head the entire time, you add details until you get where you want to go, and you can actually kind of see the path and the direction that you're going come alive in front of you. Um, I have a hard time thinking like that. I kind of think of myself more organic and less planned out, and I kind of just keep myself open to different cues and feedbacks, and then find myself being reshaped and evolving and growing as I respond and understand and take in new information, or go through different experiences, or go through my own life my own way. And so so the book so the book is essentially trying to push the idea that individuals should essentially just pursue what is authentic to them, and to each and every one of us, and to do it the way that, the best way and the only way that we could do it without compromising and without taking in feedback from other people. And the only thing and one of the ways to survive in this world, and not only to survive, but to really be your true self and fulfill your potential, is not to sit around again. And I've quoted this scene, but I love this line. Like Robin Williams says in Dead Poet Society, well, most of us spend our lives, in the business of trying to achieve other people's ambitions. Most of us spend our lives looking for other people to tell us that we're doing a good job, instead of actually listening to our intuition, to that voice inside of us, to our soul, or to that spark. And we don't do that often enough. And a lot of people don't. And so I think this book is I think this book is scary. I think the book is scary for a lot of people that are that don't want to hear that, and I think that people might, potentially incorrectly, and maybe they're interpreting it correctly and I'm interpreting it incorrectly. But the way that I look at this book isn't as an ideal guidebook for how society should be, but I think it's an ideal guidebook of how individuals should kind of hold themselves and what esteem they should hold themselves. In other words, I don't know that a world in which every single person is doesn't care about other people and doesn't take in outside perspective or outside influence, and just tries to achieve. It's almost selfishness, but but it's not selfish because I believe that selfish people feel as though they could only get what they want by taking from other people. As in, I think that selfish people sap the life out and the potential and try to get what they want, not through necessarily their own means, but often at other people's expense or sacrifice or cost. So I don't like the word selfish and what it implies and what the implication of if you say, oh, I'm a selfish person. But if you say I have a very strong sense of self, it means I just know who I am and I don't need other people to validate me or tell me that tell me who I am and what it is I'm trying to do. And it also, and when I was reading that, so when I read that book, I got this immense sense of, I just got welled up with this enormous sense. I've read it, I think, 3 or 4 times, but I remember the first time really reading it, and like I inhaled the book. I read it. I was just captivated by it almost immediately. And one of the things I really felt was, how come I'm not achieving, my potential? How come I'm not living up to my highest dreams? How come I'm doing, and then it also caused me to reassess. And a lot of times it didn't even cause any changes, but just to reassess what my values are. How come I care about this? How come I care about that? And I find myself reassessing a lot, and a lot of times because I think I do it so often, a lot of the stuff that I'm reassessing still remains consistent, right? Meaning, I might question what X, Y, and Z value is, and then I'll say, I always thought that community was valuable. Is community valuable now that I have this in mind? And then I'd have to, really think about it and think about the different applications in which community serves in my life and what my relationship to my community is, and so on. And then we'll say, yes, community is indeed important. And then when I read this book and I say, yes, well, how important is my sense of self? Yes, that's also extremely important. And is that contradictory with the sense of community? I don't think so. I think that I can exist as an individual that has boundaries and participates in a society, in a community, in a little world that actually gets me to be, that helps assist me to be myself, um, via means that I don't naturally have. Again, best example hypothetically would be that if I were to start my own business, I wouldn't. I would be very hesitant to do it myself because I know that I lack a lot of the details, nuance, and the patience, and the process, and the ability to follow steps in a process. I know I'm not good at that kind of thing. And so it actually helps me achieve myself to have a sense of community. And then while I'm doing that, I can also ostensibly help other people come into themselves and provide to them something that they don't feel like they might necessarily have. They might not have that sense of discipline or that sense of enthusiasm to, when you participate in certain, in your life. To It's very important, I believe, at least, I can't imagine a case that it's not important to be enthusiastic, whatever you're doing. We all know the difference between the people that pick up the phone when you call them and they answer and they go, hello. Like it's the last thing they ever want to do is talk to you. And then you can pick up the phone and you go, hey, what's up, man? Good to hear from you. And like all of a sudden, it's just a totally different conversation. So I think that if you apply that to anything you do, if you apply that to your job, if you apply it to work, if you apply that to, and obviously you have to have some kind of sense again of nuance, what's an appropriate time to be really enthusiastic, what's not. But enthusiasm doesn't just mean happiness. It just means to be expressive, I think, and just to be all, to be more expressive of the emotions that you are experiencing and more expressive in the actions that you're partaking in. So, um, so I don't, so I mentioned to one of the teachers in the school that I'm teaching at, one of the other two English teachers, and I mentioned that I saw the fountainhead on the desk, and this teacher is who I happen to think very highly of, and I like him a lot. He's a pretty he's a self-proclaimed, so I don't mind saying it, self-proclaimed closed-minded guy, who is a classical liberal, um, which I tend not to have a problem with, depending on um, how our conversations go. But I mean, I usually find myself to be more leaning left on a lot of issues that I talk to different friends about and different family members about, and so I trust in my kind of sense of, I guess, playing fair and having a fair conversation, having a fair game. And so he was sitting by the desk in the library, and I was stopping by because my class was in there to use some of the school computers. And I saw the Fountainhead next to him. I said, "Ah, my favorite book, or one of my favorite books." And I said it seriously. I said, "I love this book. These are my favorite books." He's like, "That's one of your favorite books?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he goes, how? Why? Like, and he was really curious. He was really confused. He's like, and he goes, you're young. You're like, he goes, I forgot what he said exactly, but something along the lines of like, you're more of an individual, not a conformist. Um, and how can you like this book? How can you like this book that's beloved by conservatives and by the right and by libertarians, I believe, and how can you like this? And then he started challenging me on some of the conversations that we were having, and one of the things that I said to him in response was, I don't think that she's right about everything. So let's just get that out of the way. I don't, when I say this is one of my favorite books, it doesn't mean that it's my favorite book because I agree with everything. I think the characters are incredible. I think the storyline is super rich. I think that the way that the book is organized and written is just magnificent. And I think that on top of that, I don't agree with everything, but I think that this is more of a guidebook for how an individual should treat themselves and view themselves than how people should look at everyone else around them in society, and how everyone should really interact in the real life world. In other words, I said there's a difference between, I think that, and Ayn Rand came from Soviet Russia. Um, and she came from full on world of communism, and so obviously a lot of her perspective is based on her experience seeing the evils of it. And I believe, probably, again, again, my 2 cents in the way that I've been looking at it and the way I think about it is that she is trying to make an extreme case to respond to extreme philosophy. And it's almost like, and I believe I said this in my last solo episode, but Maimonides, Rambam, who's a Jewish scholar, I think from like maybe 1,000, 1,100, and he has a whole book on personality and character traits. And one of the things that he talks about is that every character trait, everyone's born with almost like an extreme sense of a type of character trait. Someone could have a lot of anger. Someone be more prone to depression. Someone could be more prone to being excited and enthusiastic. Some person's more social. Some people are more introverted. And he says all these traits, he says part of the way that you can come to a healthy middle ground is all traits have these opposite traits, these traits that stand at the other end of the corner. So introvert and extrovert, for example, and I'm holding my hands wide up and wide apart while I'm speaking to emphasize this point, even though you can't see it. And we have introvert and extrovert, and if let's say I'm naturally an introvert and I don't like dealing with people, he says part of the way to deal with it is to try to make myself as extremely extroverted for as long as possible, and then when I kind of burn out from that and I settle for and I recover, I end up settling to be a little bit more in the middle than one extreme or the other. And I find that to be the case myself, at least. When it comes to, for example, I was always very hard on myself growing up, and I'm definitely not hard on myself in the same way now. When I was younger, I was harder on myself in the sense that I would tell myself that I was useless and stupid and I wouldn't be able to do anything and no one likes me. And that's a really shitty way to treat yourself, and that's a really shitty way to treat anyone. Um, but then I started treating myself with a lot of love and a lot better, but with very high expectations instead. And so what became, so I did not, I went from, and for a long time, I had this very, and I still, I've gotten much better with it, but the total opposite, or I guess I'm going to change the example, just because I think it's a little bit more tangible. I used to be extremely insecure, and I would need a lot of people's approval or validation in order for me to feel any kind of self value. And then for this was probably until around 12th grade, maybe my first year in Israel. I took a year and a half of a gap year in between high school and college. And my first year that I was there, I really started to realize that this is not a very good way to treat myself and talk to myself. And then, and then I realized that I, in fact, have a lot more to offer than I ever thought. And then for a long time, it drove me crazy. It literally, not literally hurt me, but I would get symptoms of nausea and disgust, and I would hate the feeling of asking anyone for any kind of help with anything whatsoever. And because that admission that I need other people's help was an admission to myself that I wasn't good enough. And so this is the total opposite, right? I went from needing everyone's approval to not wanting anyone's approval, and now I have a very healthy now. And now years later, I mean, this is over the course of 15 years of my life, but now years later, I have a much better time, a much easier time being vulnerable with people that I trust in a healthy group of friends and healthy group of family to call them up or to talk to them and say, hey, I need help. I need your help with this. Can I ask a favor? Can you do this? I'll help you back. I'll get you back. But I try. I need you. I need you to help me with this aspect of my life, that aspect of my life, and by doing that, I've hit a much healthier place of stability and a much healthier place of. It's not that I don't think awful things about myself now, and it's not that I don't think that I have what it takes to be able to to deal with the world, but I have a much healthier understanding that yeah, I'm not perfect, and also I am valuable, and but not everyone can do everything all the time and be perfect at everything. And so when Ayn Rand was writing this book, I think that part of the context and by the way, I'm one chapter into this biography, and it could be that in a couple of weeks when I come back and I talk about the rest of the biography, I'm like, oh shoot, I was completely wrong about it, but I don't think I am. It could be that this was just an attempt to kind of get people to overcorrect from the threat of communism, from the threat. And she's like, you know what? Like a radical argument needs a radical response. And so I'm going to provide the I'm going to I'm going to put this in the most black and white terms so that people that are not sure which way to go can kind of see what both extremes look like and hopefully settle for something in between. I don't know if that's going to be the case or not, but I really hope so because I feel like that's really what happened to me. I didn't walk away from this book thinking that everything that I walked away from reading the book thinking that Ayn Rand was absolutely brilliant, not agreeing with everything that she said, and coming away with a enormous appreciation for the amount of work that it took for her to create such a masterpiece. And I think that we're so quick to vilify in today's world. We're so quick to cancel. We're so quick to disregard it. We're so quick to not even understand people or context that that the teacher's response to me when I said that this is one of my favorite books. I was like, did you even read it? And I don't think he even did. He said that if he did, he read part of it, when he was a kid or in high school. And this guy's, in his 60s now. So I don't know. I have a hard time, so I have a hard time with just the notion of just writing it off completely without really, or writing Ayn Rand off completely without at least hearing what she has to say because she was really brilliant. Um, the other thing that was going on this week that I was definitely, I definitely felt old by, aside from being, aside from not being able to handle alcohol anymore, or hard alcohol anymore, um, is I spent quite a bit of time actually watching the three Senate confirmation hearings for RFK Jr., Tulsi Gabbard, and Kash Patel. And I have to say, it's I maybe because I'm emotionally invest. It's definitely because I'm emotionally invested, and definitely because I feel like the things that I'm entertained by. I have a list right in front of me of just bullet points of potential things I wanted to talk about. One of them was the Luka Doncic and Anthony Davis trade from the Lakers to the Mavs, and I just feel like that is so irrelevant relative to what's going on in the rest of the world that, or like what's going on at this such an exciting and pivotal point in like American in world history and American history that it's hard for me to justify talking about that over these confirmation hearings. And um, I have so many thoughts on it. I mean, I guess I'll briefly so I didn't listen to the whole thing to the whole thing for anyone because there were I mean these are probably these are hours and hours long. Um, but I listened to several hours of them and I kind of got the gist of the way that the conversations were going. And I have to say, I am so disappointed by this format of the way that the Senate hearings happen that I I think that it's really important to actually talk about because I think that if one of the things that we've learned in the last since since America became America, but definitely in the last 10, 15 years, 20 years, is that if a system isn't working, and if a system doesn't feel like it's working, especially to the young world, especially to the people that are going to the next generation of adults and people that are going to be stepping up and taking the torch after after receiving it, and it's going to happen whether or not people like it. You already see a lot of a lot of young, exciting names that whether you like them or not, left and right, and central and middle and libertarian and whatever, we're finding that younger and younger people are really popping into politics more and more, and into the world, and they're taking the mantle from a very, very, very old and obviously tone deaf with their finger off the pulse group of social and political leaders. And I think that and I think that's important to talk about. I think it's important to say that um, that first of all, the fact that each senator gets 5 minutes to berate and attack and not let anyone finish and not ask questions that are phrased or put what seems to be honestly or representative of the people that they're representing, the whole thing just felt terrible. So Cash Patel handled it the best, and what you saw was a lot of what you kind of. I'm not sure whether corporate media got it from the politicians got it from the corporate media, but it's not a lot of the people that were questioning these three, Cash and RFK and Tulsi, a lot of them were using their time to smear and to ask questions that were not indicative of what the population voted. Trying to figure out the best way to put this. And so what they would do is, for example, with Cash Patel, and he handled this brilliantly, was they would take excerpts of things that he'd said in podcasts, the most problematic, and they, by the way, is across the board because at this point it's not left against right, it's authoritarian against anti-authoritarian, and it's the old guard against the new guard, and it's the establishment against the people against people that are trying to fight corruption, and so what the people across the aisle, left and right, Republicans and Democrats, felt like they were doing, at least to the observer, me being the observer, is they would take these quotes and they would take these questions and they would pick the most vehement quotes and the most vehement stances and the most aggressive stances that were clearly not in context, and were and they would grill Cash and RFK and Tulsi about them. Cash kept his cool, so beautifully. And the only thing that he was responding the entire time, which I thought was so great, was he didn't get upset. You could tell he never got mad. He just looked kind of tired and kind of like, I can't believe we're still doing this. But he would just continuously respond. That's a partial quote. Um, I'm taking that quote out of context. I don't have anything to say because I won't defend a quote that I said that's not a full quote. I won't defend if you take a minute from my podcast and you play 1 minute of a 3 hour conversation. I'm not going to defend what that 1 minute is because you chose to ignore the rest of the context. Why don't you and I get back together after you hear it and we'll continue? Cash did a remarkable job at this. Tosi did a remarkable job at this. Um, excuse me. RFK had a little bit more trouble with it. And I don't think he handled it actually as well as I would have liked or as well as Cash or Tosi did. And part of the reason why, not to blame RFK, is because he has by far the most statements and the strongest opinions and the most sound bites that anyone, if they ever wanted, could take out of context and just twist and distort and turn into another conversation. And rather than, and it didn't feel like a conversation about or questions about how are you, RFK, Cash, and Tulsi, going to stop our, how are you going to stop our massive, our massive economic and military problems that we're experiencing? How are you going to stop these wars that are happening? How are you going to use the FBI to help Americans when crime and fentanyl and and children are missing? And what are you going to do to help with that? These weren't the questions that were being asked. The questions that were being asked to RFK weren't questions about why are you know half of Americans overweight, and like 35% of those overweight people obese. And how come one in every two people are pre-diabetic or diabetic? And how can we be healthier? And what about infertility? And what about SSRIs? And what about these things that like how do we get our people to be healthier? The questions weren't about how do we be better. The questions were why are you threatening our current position, and are you trying to undermine what we've built? And they would try to play that and ask those questions as hostilely as possible. And what this essentially feels like is almost like another round of elections where like they disregarded what the populist vote was, and they disregarded what the problems that that American people found themselves agreeing on across the board, that we don't want so many wars and we don't want to spend so much money, and inflation is an enormous problem. And the fact that I go to the grocery store and I buy a package I buy a pound of meat total, a bottle of wine, and a couple of cans of olives and chickpeas, and I spend 85, $100 on those 4 or 5 grocery objects. What the heck is that about? You know, and that's not the conversation. And so these hearings kind of went on, and at least for me, when I was listening to it, the most upsetting thing was the fact that it didn't even seem to be on the people's radar that were questioning, on the Senate's radar when they were questioning RFK, Tulsi, and Cash. And so a couple of times, Cash and Tulsi and RFK did take opportunities in their responses to push their agenda and emphasize the point of what they were trying to accomplish, that the American people obviously care about. And these are like universal sweeping problems across the country that everyone suffers from, like children's health. And Dave Smith, the political comedian, libertarian podcaster who I agree a lot with and disagree some with, but I find him to be incredibly articulate and so smart, and his examples are almost always spot on, and his take is just it's just such a pleasure to listen to him, to him elaborate he's so full of common sense. Um, oh no, I forgot where I was going with that. But he said, "Wait a minute, I haven't heard anyone run run for public office or turn children's health into a political conversation." And he goes, "But it's an enormous conversation, and like, how come we don't realize this? Like, I didn't realize that this was the conversation, and so it became a hot topic for everyone to talk about, and it became extremely important for everyone, and it just felt like everyone that was on the Senate was completely tone deaf to the fact that to the real issues that were bothering a lot of Americans, and they were grilling RFK, Tulsi, and Cash on petty, stupid, nuanced questions that people don't really care about, at least as far as I know. And listen, some of them did have good questions, but I don't want to make it seem like the entire thing was a waste, and that there were no intelligent people and no thoughtful points being made, because there were a lot of them. And a lot would be pretty generous, but there was some of that. But by and large, it was pretty much an event. It almost felt like the whole job of the Senate hearings was to put the three of them on the defense and not allow them to express what their solutions were and how they were planning on solving these problems. And it was more just about attacking them rather than, hey, can you use 5 minutes to explain the thing that I care about most right now? Can you use 5 minutes to explain how we're going to make sure that the government doesn't spy on Americans, using the, on Americans without a warrant. Can you explain to me how we can stop other Edward Snowdens from happening, and what would cause Edward Snowden to exist to begin with? And and so when that didn't happen, it was is upsetting, and and this is kind of what, again, I just felt like I was watching legacy media. I felt like I was watching Fox and CNN and MSNBC and these journalists, and actually, I mean, thankfully, recently, a lot of these people are getting, a lot of these journalists are getting sassy responses from Trump and from and from JD Vance and from the other young leaders. Trump's not young, obviously, but other young leaders around, that they're not even putting up with these kind of questions and the way the questions are being framed. Um, and that leads me to my last point and thought, which is I'm so entertained and so happy with and curious about how much attention and how seriously comedians are actually being taken. And I have a couple of reasons why I think that. The I think in order to be a comedian, especially a really successful and funny comedian, you have to be nuanced, you have to be smart, and you kind of have to have a little bit of a I don't want to say disdainful, but a little bit of a critical perspective on the world around you, where you can point out problems, or you can point out issues, you can point out flaws, and even if you phrase it as something funny, the conclusion that you came to was because only exists because the comedian was so funny and thoughtful and aware and nuanced. And and it's so interesting because it feels now, to me at least, that the comedians, and I think that if you were to use numbers, and if this was a poll, and if you were to look up, just the overall impact that comedians have in the podcast space or on social media, as opposed to the impact that corporate news has, a lot more people, including world leaders like Trump and JD and Vivek and Tulsi and RFK and Elon and all these people are giving comedians a lot more time a day than they're giving any kind of other news organization. And part of the reason why is not because it's going to be easy lowball pitches; it's because it's actually fun, dynamic, and interesting. Andrew Schultz too has also been out of control, and in a good way. He's out of control because he says crazy things that are thought provoking. He says crazy things that really require a candid and measured response from the people that he's interviewing and he's interacting with. And these are the kind of conversations, these are the kind of interviews, this is the kind of talk that actually gets down to the root of a lot of problems. And when a comedian is able to say, listen, man, I was just in Des Moines, Iowa, and then I was just in Seattle, Washington, and then I was just in Gainesville, Florida. And here's what I've noticed, just being on the street and talking to people and getting the sense of the audience, and what do people laugh at? What do people not find funny? How do things go? And they go, what do you think about that, Mr. Leader? What do you think about that, Mr. Entrepreneur? What do you think about that, Mr. Mr. PhD, brilliant doctor, scientist, whatever it is that you are, and you can have a legitimate conversation and again, you have all these different lenses. You have lenses from CEOs, you have lenses from tech people, you have lenses from scientists, you have lenses of doctors, you have lenses of politicians, and you have all these different perspectives, and you're asking similar conversations, similar questions. Theo Vaughn is very good at this because Theo Vaughn has his own really unique spin on the way he looks at things and the way he thinks about things. But then he forces the people that he interviews to answer to bizarre scenarios and really makes them creative and really makes them work. It makes them think. And I think that it's really, really, really a beautiful and wonderful thing that actually makes our world a lot better. And I only hope that more and more of them become more serious. And it's actually cool because whatever they're interested in, it looks like comedians are leading the way. You know, like Shane Gillis might be funny as a stand-up comedian, but he loves history and he loves his Bud Light and he loves his jokes and he loves his skits and so he makes incredible Bud Light commercials now. And he has a Netflix show, which is essentially a 20-minute YouTube skit, which he does too. And that on top of killing it in stand-up, he's like he became a marketing, advertising, you know, comedic whiz. And it all started because someone was like, "Wow, this stand-up is both really nuanced, really informational, and really funny." Um, and Rogan obviously being Rogan, Theo Vaughn obviously being Theo Vaughn, Dave Smith obviously being Dave Smith, and the list goes on and on. We have just so many. Sam Morril loves his sports, and you know what? Let him be. Let him if he's combining the part of his brain that is that's detail oriented, and he applies it to sports, and he applies it to to having his opinion on the Knicks and on the Jets or the Giants or whatever it is, whatever fan he is, then freaking amazing. I mean, because that's what you want. You want more of that type of thinking. You want people to think like that too, I think. I think that you should definitely at least have it available and definitely have people and have world leaders or have American leaders work with them and talk to them so that the American public can kind of get what people think really in a unique and special way. So those are just some thoughts for today. I think this is episode number 80 or 81. Hope you enjoy. Got a couple more guest episodes this week, but that's it for today. Have a great rest of the weekend, everyone. Bye, everyone.